myself almost kind of not motivated right now, or really excited, I guess is a better word, for the upcoming season, particularly for my team, Alabama, because as much as I try to defend non-conference scheduling, it's really bad. I got to say, the opening week of football. I mean, we're playing Duke. I'm still trying to figure out whose idea was that. So it's kind of hard for me to. I'm actually more excited about other teams, honestly, about what they're doing in week one.
Absolutely. I was reviewing some schedules. So here in the next few weeks, I'm going to be ranking the schedules and projecting records. So I was looking at some schedules, and I am pretty astonished by the guts of some teams to get out there and schedule like some really difficult non-conference schedules. Like a Stanford, they play Northwestern, UCF, and Notre Dame. Those are their 3 non-conference games. So they don't play an easy gimme game, because then the rest of their 9 games are all conference games. And of course, the SEC is much better than the Pac-12, but still, they went out there and scheduled those games. And then I see these other. There just has to be uniformity given to it. There has to be. I would love to see a committee take over, even though I'm not a big fan of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Maybe a committee that I form, but that would take over the scheduling business and level the playing field, level it out so everyone play a difficult game. So in the case of the SEC, you've got 4 non-conference games. I would even allow them to schedule 2 on their own, so they can schedule an FCS and a group of 5, but give them in my format, give them 2 games of teams that finished a combined 500 from the previous season in conference. So Duke went 3-5 in the ACC last year. Then Alabama would have to go play somebody else who went 5-3, or the equivalent, 6-3 in their conference from last year. So they'd have to play somebody who's considerably better or projected to be better.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I consider myself more of a college football purist, I don't really do much with the NFL. I got to say, the way they do their scheduling is just, in every meaning of the word, superior. People try to say college football has the most unique regular season in all of sports, and while that may be true, it's the most unique. It doesn't make it the best. It's just when you have teams like you just said, you brought up Stanford going out and playing 2 Power 5 and 1 Group of 5 that acts like a Power 5, or at least they talk like one. But what you've got to be fair and say, remember that Notre Dame is every year for them. It still counts as a hard non-conference game. But when you have schools that can do that, and then on the other side, you got schools that'll schedule FCS opponents, 2 other group of 5 schools, and then 1 mediocre Power 5 school like Duke or Louisville. Is this? I don't know. I just kind of don't think that's right. I don't. If you ask me, is that earning the national championship? It's kind of hard for me to say yes. I mean, if Alabama were to have gone 15-0 last year, yeah, they would have earned it, because they would have ended up beating the best teams. But even that was kind of out of their control. There was no guarantee Georgia getting in the SEC championship. There's no guarantee of Clemson not stumbling at the very end, or maybe Alabama playing Notre Dame or something in the playoffs. The only thing that you do have control of right now are those non-conference games, because the conference games are scheduled for you. The non-con ones are what you yourself go out and get to at least try to, I would hope at least, try to prove yourself, I guess, to the rest of the country. And it's just really kind of sad to see that when schools, again, like Alabama, get to the point where they are now, and that it's just not a factor to them anymore. And I suppose there's probably something to be said that they don't really think they have anything to prove to anybody. And I suppose there's some truth to that, but still, I mean, it can't be good for the sport itself. It can't be good for sales or enthusiasm. I mean, you got to think that that the Alabama and Florida State game, the hype of that game was off the chart.
Yep.
Disregarding what happened with the regular season after that, it was off the chart going into that game. You got to think the excitement and the money, the advertising money that pulled in was really good for college football.
Yep.
There's no way that anyone's going to tell me Louisville and Duke are raking in those kind of numbers.
No, not at all. They're not. So this is why, to me, when Alabama wins a national championship, it's legitimate, is because of the conference is so good. So I'm not arguing that they didn't earn it in a sense because they play in the best division. Arguably, I believe it's still the best division, and they play in the best overall conference. So to get to the national championship or the national playoff, they of course have to get through Texas A&M and LSU and Auburn. Then they have to play somebody decent on the other side, although you get Tennessee every year and they haven't been any good. But then you've got to win a conference championship. So by the time you get to the first college football playoff game, you have beaten 4 or 5 top 15 type teams. So I'm not going to discount Alabama or anyone winning a national championship like Clemson did against a horrible conference. The conference was atrocious last year. Because they did show up then when they played Notre Dame and Alabama and showed, okay, we're really this good. But they didn't have to go through anything close to a gauntlet. The issue that I have is that since this is not an objective system in which every conference and every team in every conference is given a similar opportunity, and at least a conference, if not 2, get shut out because of the presence of Notre Dame, we're having to take these non-conference games and use them as a barometer to rate teams and by extension rate the conferences and how good the conferences are. So if they're not playing each other, reasonably seeded teams aren't playing each other, we don't have much to go on.
No, we don't. I mean, but who wouldn't give a lot right now to see or to have seen under Urban Meyer an Alabama and Ohio State rematch?
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, what if that would have actually happened? And there were several times where it looked like it was going to either one of the two stumbled on the way. But it shouldn't have to be that hard for it to happen. They shouldn't have to meet in the playoffs, right? They should be able to, at least once every few years, meet in the regular season. Now, there's a flip side to that. I still mandate that it is difficult for Alabama to get teams to schedule them. They can't just go out and write the name in and say, you're playing us in a few years. There's not a lot of benefit for teams really high up there with a good chance to make the playoffs to go ahead and pencil in, let's face it, a loss on the first week of college football. But it's got to be better than this, though. There is just no defending 2 years back to back Louisville and Duke. Some people want to tell me that Louisville was somewhat of a good team, and no, they struck gold for a little bit there with Lamar Jackson, but not after that. You're never going to ever convince me that Alabama and Duke ever need to be on the same field. I really don't care if Duke won the ACC. It's just an entire different. That speaks more about the conference than it does.
Yes.
Duke's football.
So reasonable Gump. I appreciate your neutrality on this as a big Alabama fan, because I've told many people who said last year, well, Alabama didn't know that Louisville was going to be no good. Absolutely. They had no idea that Louisville, who typically goes 7-5, 8-4, was going to plummet into the abyss and go 2-10 and be one of the worst teams in the country. They didn't know that, but they also could generally know that Louisville wasn't going to be a top team. When has Louisville been a top team, an elite team? Basically, Louisville has been an 8-4 team forever and for a long time, and that's the program that they've been. They've been a fringe top 25 program, so Alabama could generally foresee that they weren't going to be standing up against one of the top 5 or 10 teams in the nation. So,
the good news is it's going back to, it looks to be at least after this year, going back to kind of the way it was for a while there when Saban took office or there. Because next year we have USC. Now, again, we all know that USC isn't a top tier right now, but they very well could be by that point if they can recruit at least half of the state like they should be. We actually got, and you'll be happy to hear this, Mark. We have a home and home with Texas 23, and then
yeah, that's going to be fun.
We have Miami.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. So, Reasonable Gump, this is my plan. I don't know if you've heard it before, and I'll try to trim it down to give it a quick synopsis. Is that so? I would take the non-conference scheduling out of the hands of the schools. I would build a committee, and the committee wouldn't even. It's not like they would make judgment calls. It would all be a formula that would be built to make sure that. And I would not model this after the NFL. So you give credit to the NFL. I do as well. They're trying to create parity. So they're giving the New England Patriots a more difficult schedule than the Cleveland Browns because they're trying to create parity. I wouldn't want to try to create parity. I just want to create fairness in scheduling. So Alabama's schedule would out of conference would be no more difficult than Vanderbilt's, but everyone would have a fair schedule out of conference based on the results from the previous season. Now, of course, you can't project into the future and know who's going to get better and who's going to get worse. But there could be in that some, this is where the committee would come into play to say, yeah, we know that this team went 7-1 in their conference last year, but they're not supposed to be quite as good this year. Therefore, we need to balance it out. But the numbers would make sense, and we would take it out of the hands of the schools that would negate situations like, do you realize Ohio State does not play a non-conference Power 5 team this year? Ohio State does not play a Power 5 team. That's atrocious. That just cannot happen. Now, like our Alabama case, if Ohio State goes undefeated or loses one game close and they beat Penn State, Michigan State, and Wisconsin and Nebraska on, I'm not going to have an issue, or at least to a certain extent, not have an issue with saying, okay, they're probably one of the 4 best teams in the country, but why didn't they play somebody out of conference? Well, there was an issue with TCU, and they were going to play a home and home, and then they decided just to play one game, and so then that altered Ohio State's schedule for this year, and they didn't get to play TCU again. So it wasn't necessarily anybody's fault. I don't know who was making the power play there, but that's the point. It would be taken out of the school's hands of, moving their own agenda. And we would have this big college football schedule release, just like they do in the NFL, and we wouldn't be scheduling games 12 years in advance. I don't understand. There's no reason to schedule games 12 years in advance. You have a schedule release on April 1st or March 1st or whenever, and you say, here's the college football schedule for next season, and everybody gets excited because they know that the release is coming out, and we can all talk about it. We don't need to talk about the game that's scheduled in 2032.
That's exactly what got me, is that people say, well, we need to have to schedule these that far in advance. I'm like, no, you don't. They make the playoff schedule 1 month in advance. They somehow are able to do that. Yeah, well, this is way more complicated. That's only 4 teams. I'm like, all right, then make them uncomplicated. Make the college football nationwide first 3 weeks are all non-con games. Those are the ones handled on a year-by-year basis, and then the week before rivalry week, throw in that as the 4th non-con game. If you do it like the SEC and ACC, I don't think you should. I think it should just be the first 3 weeks are all non-con games for every single school out there, and then let the conferences handle their own schedules. If they want to do them a decade in advance, fine, as long as it doesn't interfere with those first 3 weeks.
There you go.
And then it'd be easy enough to do. You only have to schedule out 1 year in advance, not even a year, May, so about 5 or 6 months in advance, just for those first 3 weeks. And it could be like you said, Vanderbilt may get 2 kind of even-ish teams, 2 6-6, 7-5 type team. Maybe you give Alabama and Oklahoma, and then on the flip side of it, you let them play Louisville.
Exactly.
So it's not actually difficult, but not only did you create a fair schedule, you created at least one huge matchup that's just going to rake in all the cash, and that's good for everybody. Because when it comes down to it, college football is about money. That's why they keep doing it, is because it makes a lot of money for all these schools, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing, particularly. I don't really like the argument of playing FCS schools to give them a paycheck because I kind of think that's kind of prostituting those players out to do that. But you get my point. You can make the schedule in a way that you still get really big matchups, but it's still not any harder necessarily for any one team. And you can make it easy and simplified by just having every one-man day, their first 3 weeks, y'all play non-con games, and then you go on to the rest of your conference. And you mentioned a decade scheduling in advance. Did you know that Alabama has a home-and-home with Notre Dame in 2029?
I've seen these games scheduled as far out as 2033. It's ridiculous. Georgia, Florida State, and somebody else got into this. There's kind of a round robin between those three. Just about 10 days ago, I cut a video when the news came out. Some of those games are scheduled out to 2033.
That's ridiculous. And you also mentioned how, like Ohio State and Alabama right now, they run the gauntlet even with terrible non-con schedules. They're still going to get in, and no one's really going to talk that much about it because they still went through the SEC or the Big Ten.
Yep.
But that's not the case with Washington or Oregon. If they don't play, like you said, Washington doesn't play anyone this year.
BYU's their toughest game.
Okay. If they lose one game, no one's talking about them because they don't have anything to back it up with, being in the Pac-12. Because a lot of people consider the Pac-12 the worst or the second worst conference.
Yep.
So their case isn't like they don't have it as easy as Alabama or Ohio State. They need to go schedule those games to make themselves look good, and then that runs into a whole different conversation with the fact that you have to make yourself something got to work harder to make themselves look good just to get into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just such a strange kind of system we got going on. Don't get me wrong. I do think it's an improvement over the BCS.
Sure, it is.
And the system for that, but it definitely could be better. I just don't understand why they think they have to take baby steps up the ladder. Like, we already see a model that works. Yes, the NFL one. Even if you don't like the idea of bye weeks, then just make it 8 teams and have them go from there. But it doesn't have. I feel like everyone knows we're going to get there at some point. I don't really understand why we have to crawl there. Why don't we skip the boring stuff and all the controversies and the conspiracy theories and the what do they call it? The Alabama Invitational talks. All that. Let's just get right down to where everyone really kind of wants to be. Not everyone, but most people.
Yeah, it's just so simple and logical that it just can't get done. And in what I believe would be similar formulas between yours and mine, you're giving representation to everyone on one hand, but also if you have a couple of wild cards, you're giving extra representation to those conferences and those teams that earned it based on playing extremely well, but falling a little bit short of a conference championship. That won those games out of conference against the kind of schedules we're talking about. You know, if LSU goes 11-1, loses to Alabama, but they went out and beat Miami and they beat TCU in non-conference games, and they played really well against, Texas A&M and Georgia and Florida and all these other teams, and they'll get their seed as a wild card.
And wild cards aren't a bad thing either. I mean, technically, not technically, but I guess more theoretically speaking, our college football playoff right now is literally four wild cards.
Yeah, we used to think
because it's all opinionated, right? There's no set way to get in.
Well, we now have had 3 teams not win a conference and make the college football playoff. So yeah, it's becoming more of a trend that it's just whoever they want to select.